I hate to steal a brother's tagline here, but it's time to be excellent
Hell
with
yeah.
Teddy Jenner.
Hell yeah.
How you doing, man?
Good, man. How the hell's going on? How are you?
I'm doing good. I noticed Pat hooked you up with a cool Bet Canada hat there.
Yeah, this is the Stay Cool Country Club. Big fan of the Cool Bet. Obviously, they sponsor our show with our box bets, and Pat is obviously a big deal over there. So sometimes there are some perks to the gig, Michael.
He's a pretty big deal. Is it country manager? I guess that means the can. I don't know. They're
Yeah,
only in
he's the
Canada,
he's
I
the
thought, right?
regional manager for like all of Canada, which is pretty awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
OTCB podcast. I gotta ask you, as a Spotify fan, I've told people we were on Spotify Daily Dive, but OTCB podcast is also on Spotify.
Yeah.
Where is the Thomas Kazik episode?
This is kind of funny.
Oh.
So it has just come to our attention that the intro music that I've been using for over a decade, was actually licensed. So
No.
starting this week, we will have a brand new theme song. I don't know. So I think Spotify is just going to start taking down everything. So
Oh.
we have a good backup of all of our shows on my computers and on different databases, but yeah, we might have a bit of a turnover on our shows, thanks to Spotify. So I love it. It's accessible everywhere, but yeah, it just sounds that seems like they finally caught on to me being a naughty boy. So we'll have a new theme song this week. I got to say, your guys' theme song, as I'm sitting here listening to it every day, just reminds me of Shoresy, the music from the TV show Shoresy that we have up here. It's just it's a good little catchy tune, and I'm a big fan of it. So what a tangent we just went on.
Yeah, and again, you were not expecting that, and I just was like, I was kind of confused and saddened, but to new eras, Teddy, and we're happy to be
Hell
here.
yeah, brother.
So. Alrighty, I gotta first ask you about this, because I've been chirping you guys on Twitter a little bit with it. The NLL picks.
Yeah.
This past week I did go 4-3. You went 2-5. I forgot. Like Pat was like 3-4. Maybe I forgot.
Yeah.
I'm surprised other people actually did better than that because I was like mad about
Yeah,
that.
it was a tough week for everybody.
Yeah. So how have you? What is your record? I think I've got. I'm still down by like 1 or 2 games. How in the world have you gauged the NLL better than other people? It feels like this year.
I think this maybe other than this past weekend, most of the times, like my gut's just kind of been right. I don't go too deep into analytics and the deep numbers. I just kind of gauge myself from a team versus team perspective and how they match up, and coaches' abilities to in-game management and the ability for teams to kind of evolve as games go on. So yeah, Pat, nice brag, but again, no one likes to teach his pet. But it's kind of been not easy, but it's been easier this year than in years past, just because I think in most games there's kind of there's a general better team, and that's mostly who I'm going with. Sometimes I'll take a flyer, sometimes I'll just flip a coin, but for the most part it's been pretty easy kicking Pat's ass.
Clip it, as Jake Elliott says.
Yeah.
And no, it has been fun this year. Since you mentioned the best team aspect of it, I'm just gonna get to that first thing. I know Bandits are the easy take here, but who's the best team not named the Bandits? Because I'm thinking of like this. I was about to say Swarm. That was terrible. I was thinking about the what are they called? The Rush. I think Vancouver's got a shot. Wings are sneaky good. I thought Roughnecks were going to be terrible. Who is your best team not named Buffalo?
The Toronto Rock.
Okay.
I think it's kind of obvious with the return of Tom Schreiber getting healthy with Challen Rogers, Latrell Harris. They're going to get Brad Cree. For a lot of the home games, you'll probably get Brad Cree because he can work a 24-hour at the fire hall, catch nap, go play the game like he did a few weeks ago against Ottawa. Wow. But they're healthy. That defense is playing a whole lot better in front of Nick Rose, which allows Nick Rose to be a better goaltender. He's still letting too many outside shots in over the shoulder for me. Sometimes when he steps out, he is as he plays, very stoic, and guys are able to kind of pick around him at points. But this team is a different animal than they were at the start of the season. Their record wasn't who they showed they actually were. And now that they're healthy, I think a lot of teams are realizing that the Toronto Rock that we've seen the past 4 years is finally back. But, you mentioned Vancouver. For me, I think their offense needs to get a little better. I think they need to be a little more efficient. Nobody thought Calgary was going to be this good, but somehow they keep finding ways to win games. Cam McLeod's making the saves that he needs to make, so they're playing really well. I like Philadelphia, but again, their defense is a little susceptible to me. And then I think you said the Rush right off the hop, and maybe they might be the most surprising, especially the way Thomas Kajak has played the past 2 weekends without Frank Chiliano. So knowing that they can rely on TK if Frankie gets tired down the stretch, and the way this offense is playing, I think Saskatchewan's definitely right up there. But for me, hands down, it's the Toronto Rock.
And I'm glad you mentioned the Rock, and it's probably correct. I mean, even if despite the record, it feels like to me I said yesterday they've won 4 straight, even though they've only run 3 straight on paper. And one of the reasons I said that was because the game you and Pat did was just. We're gonna get to the fun part in a minute, but I felt like when they got Challen Riders back that game, it was like, oh my God, they're all of a sudden good again. What happened?
Well, even after their first 2 games, after that second game where they got blown out for the second straight weekend, they had some time off. They were able to kind of just talk about some things, and they allowed Josh Dawick to kind of evolve into this really proficient outside shooter. They were still trying to work through some injuries with Mark Matthews. The lefties kind of struggled, but the next 2 games, 3 games even, they were losing by 1-2 goals. Like, they were in all those games. They probably could have won a lot of those games. They had a couple tough, crease calls right at the end to force overtimes and to win games. But this is a team that just kind of started to get their wheels out of the mud a little bit. And again, they started to get healthy. Then when Challen Rogers, he's so vital to that team, Mike, because he can do a little bit of everything. He is legitimately a 5-tool player. Power short, face-offs, offense, defense, he can play it all. And when you get a guy like that, it's just a calming presence on the floor for everybody. And then you add in Tom Schreiber, and now he can really calm the offense down. There was one moment, and they kind of have a bit of it on when they had him mic'd up in the Calgary game. And I watched it from the broadcast booth. They were really unsettled offensively. And he got the ball. He just came on the floor. He got the ball, and he put his hands up, and he screamed, "Settle down, calm down." And it just allowed him to take a breath. And then they went out and scored on that shift. Like, they didn't have that in the first month and a bit. And so now that they have all those really definitive leadership pieces and guys that can just calm everybody down, it just brings that team to a whole nother level.
I agree with that. And as an emotional guy, I appreciate when people can kind of take a step back sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially even as an athlete, I'm sure it's 10 times harder. For the Rock, since you mentioned Dawick, him and Bushi, what they've done without Schreiber and Rogers in the first place, to me, might have been the best thing for that team. And then we see Dawick goes off in the last game. But something in that Rock Bandits game a few weeks ago happened, and it has to be talked about. And I don't know if Pat just said, screw it, just go ahead, Teddy. But you saying, like, Gash with a heavy right and another right felt like Joe Rogan to me before anyone said it. How did you, in that moment, know how to captivate that? What was going through you and Pat's heads?
Yeah, well, you never know, because you just don't know what's going to happen, right? When 2 guys step back, and it's legitimately, for lack of a better term, a street fight, because it's 2 guys on feet just throwing, right? Nobody's getting in between. And I did hear your little rant at the start of the show, and I do have some thoughts on that as well. But you just have to let it happen. And Pat is a seasoned professional as a color analyst. He knows that, for the bulk of the talking, it's going to be my voice, and I'm kind of doing everything. And then when there's a moment, he can get in. But you just call it like you see it. And that's the way I've always done it. And, I get emotional like you and so many other people. And I'm invested in this sport because I put so many miles of my life into this league and into this sport that, I get as excited as a fan would. And in that moment, it was like, holy crap, what a punch. Oh my God, what another punch. And yeah, it just kind of comes out of your mouth fluidly as you're in the moment.
How do you balance that as quickly as a broadcaster, former athlete, and super fan of the same sports? Like, how do you not go overboard? Because some guys can do that.
Yeah, no, I think it's respect for the players. It's respect for the league, because you don't want to make a mockery of it. You don't want to,
Right.
and kudos to our producer, Peter Buchanan, who's in my ear, and he's like, let's not make this bigger than it is, right? Like let's keep it. Let's keep our minds focused on what's actually happened. Yes, it was an unbelievable punch and a wild scene, but Noseworthy's down the ground, knocked out, right? Like, let's pull the reins back a little bit. So that's always a bonus to have. But again, I think it's having respect for what's just happened, for the game, and just, keeping it, within the lines of proper commentary.
I love it. And again, you guys did a great job. You and Pat both. You guys always do well.
Thank you.
Let's, let's get to this now. We talked about the Bandits, and the Rock probably being the second best team.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk MVP now. I don't know if we're throwing goalies at the wall, because I feel like there's a few of them you could, like with Higgins and Vince, obviously. Who is your MVP? Is it a goalie right now through 8 or 9 games?
No, it's not. I think when you look at how the league is, I think Zach Higgins has been great, but he's, past few weeks, he's come back down to earth. As much as I don't like to agree with Mitch Belisle very often, him saying that it's Tom Schreiber and what the Rock have done in the past few weeks, I think is a great representation of what he's meant to that team. And we always talk about it, most valuable player to a team.
Mm-hmm.
And you could probably even throw Challen Rogers' name in that as well, because as soon as those two guys have come back and gotten healthy, this team has taken a complete 180-degree turn. And that, to me, is a true definition of what an MVP player is. And I remember there were some years, if Calgary would have been 1-15 by the time the year's done, you could say, tongue-in-cheek, that the MVP is Christian Del Bianco, just because, that's how much he has meant to that team. But that would never happen. But the fact that what Rogers and what Schreiber have done to bring this Rock team back to prominence and really turn their season around just exemplifies what they mean to their team. And that's what a true MVP is. Like, you could look at what Dane does, what Vino's done, all those other guys on that Buffalo team, Ian McKay just having an unbelievable season. Like, you could throw any of those guys' names in that conversation. But true value, it's either Schreiber or Rogers for me.
That's why Mitch Jones, me putting him on my leaderboard at all, was frustrating. Even the Bandits, like putting Burner Smith, is like, how do you do that? Knowing there's another Robin right there or Batman with them. It's crazy.
Yeah, and when you have, a team like Buffalo, and this has been the argument the past 3 years, right? Is it Byrne? Is it Dane? Is it Vino? And people are putting, both 2 of 3 guys on their lists every year. And I just never understand how you can have 2 guys that are the most valuable. One has to be more valuable than the other. As great as both of those or all 3 of those guys are, you can only pick one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad problem to have for those teams.
No, of course not. Every team in the NLL would want that, but can't be that.
And I don't want to harp on the voters, but
No, and I like the pick of Mitch Jones. I think Patty might have had him this year or last year as our preseason MVP. The guy is incredibly valuable to that team. You can go around the league and find guys that bring the most value, and some guys are more outstanding than others. Like in Vancouver, is it Aiden Walsh or is it Owen Grant? Like who is it? Aiden Walsh is, top 2, top 3 goaltender in the NLL at just 24 years old, 25 years old. And then you got Owen Grant, who's in his second season, and he's just blowing things out of the water. So, it all comes down to what you truly feel value means in that discussion.
I have a question because my brain went here.
Yeah,
and I was thinking, but the reason I put Jones eventually, right from again, this like a couple weeks ago, is because he was scoring goals. And to me, I don't know how a former NLL player or person who's around the league way more than I am and you feel, but it feels like to me those hockey assists are kind of push guys over the top. This is not just a Jeff T thing.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
I feel like goals should matter way more, right?
Well, first of all, it's a lacrosse assist, Michael. We've had the secondary assist as long as hockey's had it, so let's get that out of your lexicon.
That's fair.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Like, you would have to take a true deep dive into a player's, stat line to see how many of assists are primary assists and how many of assists are secondary assists. And you could weigh that. But, a lot of times that secondary assist is still, helping set up the offense to what you're trying to do. So it may not be the direct correlation to a goal, but if you throw that top skip from, if Schreiber throws it from the top down to Boucher on the crease and he one times it across to Smallsy, the initial pass, helped set up what they were doing. So, yes, goals will play a bigger factor, but, when you look at most, we're kind of leaning towards like most offensive player in this instance, you're just going to look for the guy who just had the most outstanding year across the board.
Good point. By the way, the tic-tac-toe assist I'm on board with, but then it gets to the point of how do you gauge which one is which? So I
get it, but it's just part of the process of how offenses work.
Fair point. All right, so let's do Albany now. Albany Firewolves, Teddy. What in your brain, in your mind, what is the biggest reason you've seen them fail?
Yeah, and I said this last week on the podcast. Unlike Toronto, they aren't getting healthy. No Jackson Nishimura, no Colton Watkinson, no John Wagner. Those three guys are massive in their back end, and we saw what taking key cogs out of a team can do to Toronto. The defense is different because more guys are getting in that aren't comfortable or haven't played as much in that system. Doug Jamieson isn't seeing as many shots as he would like because those three guys aren't dictating where offenses go as often as they were. Their offense is still putting up numbers. Their transition game has been lacking and their defensive structure has been lacking, which leads to, unfortunately, again, like we talked about Toronto, they don't have that calming leadership presence. Now they truly are a really young team with those three veterans back there. So, you can look at a guy like Joe Nardella to be a rah, let's go kind of guy, but that's not really his role. He's got a specific defined role. So they don't have Colton or Jackson or Wags out there just to, pull that defense in for a timeout or a huddle and say, hey, let's figure it out. Let's communicate better. Let's be out on hands a little bit more, whatever it needs to be. So the biggest, and it's glaring, the reason Albany has struggled is because they don't have those three guys, and they're probably not going to have those three guys the rest of the year.
Oh, see, I'm a guy who I love Colton Watkinson a lot.
Oh, so do I.
Like, he's the one that sticks out for me the most, is the one that I'm thinking is missing the most.
But and Nishimura runs transition, Wags blocks shots, gets loose balls, picks up and runs in transition. It's a completely different team without those three guys.
Oh, for sure. So let's do this now. You have a game this weekend.
Yeah.
You are a West Coast guy. And I know Pat's going to miss you wherever he's at.
Yeah, Pat will be on his couch, digging a hole into his couch, getting ready for the Super Bowl.
Digging a hole, that's good. The Calgary Roughnecks, the surprise Roughnecks, take their offense and Cam McLeod with Go Abrams maybe against the Vancouver Warriors, who we touched on a little bit before. Their offense can come and go at times. Mm-hmm. What do you expect? Can Calgary dictate this game and pull off the upset?
I know it's sort of past stats, and I said earlier I'm not a guy who looks at analytics, but I found this to be an absolute crazy stat. Since this Vancouver franchise has moved to the West Coast, so since they were the Albany Attack and moved to become the San Jose Stealth, to the Washington Stealth, the Vancouver Stealth, now the Vancouver Warriors, Calgary is 24-8 on the road.
Wow.
They've only lost 8 games against the Stealth / Warriors on the West Coast. I don't know what it has been with them. And I think one of the big reasons, honestly, is so many of those guys have BC ties. So they have tons of family and friends that come to those games. So they get, and this was, times where the Warriors were the Stealth in Vancouver and weren't really drawing well. And even in the first couple years in Rogers Arena, they weren't drawing well. So sometimes when Calgary would come to play, they would have a really heavy fan base because of so many guys bringing family and friends. And sometimes, they were a lot louder than the home fans. So it was like a bit of a home game for them. So I think that was just a crazy stat that I found. But I think this is going to be a fun little matchup. You have a very big, imposing Vancouver defense going against a Calgary offense that loves to move the ball, loves to move feet. So they're going to have to really figure out how to combat each other. And then you got two young goaltenders, and Aiden Walsh and Cam McLeod going toe-to-toe. Two guys, that kind of not directly, but have some correlation to each other and in the positions that they're playing. So I'm looking forward to this one. I think the Kurt Milosky, Josh Sanderson ties are always cool. The Kurt Milosky versus Calgary ties are always going to be a storyline that we're going to talk about. So I'm very invested in this game, and I think a lot of people are going to be excited because I could see this being 14-13. I could see it being a 7-6 game. So, and that's just kind of the way the NLL's been. But, Vancouver's allowing just over 9 a game or just under 9 a game. Calgary's, scoring about 12 a game. So they can put up numbers. But I think for Vancouver, and this goes in line with their offense, if they're going to have success, they have to get their power play going. They're dead last in the National Lacrosse League, which just doesn't sit well with Kurt Milosky. So they have to get that going because Calgary is prone to taking some penalties. So if they can find a way to be successful on the power play and not give up shorthanded goals, which Calgary can score in bunches, then I think they'll be okay. But this is going to be an absolute dogfight. These two teams have never liked each other. And again, when you get that familiarity with two teams, it just leads to, it's like Toronto Buffalo. For these two clubs, it's obviously not as storied in length and of history and in past, but there is no love lost between these two clubs.
I love the entire breakdown there. You mentioned Milosky hates the power play. I don't know if I hate it. I'm sure he does too.
Yeah.
I gotta touch on one more thing before I let you go here. You mentioned the BC connection.
Mm-hmm.
As a former player, because I've heard that said before about their family's there. How much more of an effort do you put into being great that night?
There's obviously a little extra pep in your step because your boys are in the crowd watching, cheering you on and enjoying the moment. So, and you want to be able to kind of score a goal on the road and be able to see your fans in the stands and point up to them because, for a lot of these guys, those people don't get to go to their games. You look at, a guy like Curtis Dixon, he plays in Calgary, so when he comes to Vancouver once a year. So for those people to come and see him, for him to have his wife and kid there, and there's always a little extra juice on those nights because of the people that are in the stands.
I forget you're a good Victoria boy too. I just looked that up. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah, we'll be on the ferry Thursday morning. Ooh. Nice little hour and 35-minute ferry ride across the Strait of Juan de Fuca to the mainland. And we'll get together with our producers and go for some sushi Thursday night. And then big game Friday on TSN.
Who's on the call with you?
It'll be myself, Brad Challoner, Chantel Chand. The three of us have a really cool bond. We all went to the same radio school together. We're all hired at the same radio station by the same guy who's often our stats guy. So we have a pretty cool story arc, the three of us, and we can't wait to get to Calgary and get to Vancouver and call the game for everybody.
The chemistry is why it works. It makes sense to me now.
Yeah, there you go, bro.
Teddy, we appreciate you as always. I wish we could talk about this all day, but I do appreciate your time once again. You and Pat do a great job, and you and whoever you're broadcasting with always do a good job. Remain excellent, Teddy. I appreciate you, man.
I appreciate you guys. It was awesome to meet producer Joe in Buffalo a couple weeks ago. That was fun. So someday down the road, you and I got to share a pint, my friend. All the best. Stay safe down there in Georgia, and be excellent to each other, folks.
Absolutely. Teddy Jen, everybody, of the OTCB podcast.